Today we'll talk about the Godox Wireless Flash System and why it's not very optimal for the Hasselblad leaf shutter systems or any leaf shutter system in fact. And maybe considering buying a Raven from Fusion TLC will help you on this. Alternatively, another system may improve your experience of using flash on a leaf shutter system. I'm Richard and welcome to Zappy Production. So today I'll talk about the Godox wireless system here, explain a little bit on the concept of flash firing and why, after using the Hasselblad with the Godox system, I came to a conclusion that you need a way to improve it. And there are two ways. Firstly, it's not to use the Godox system. I mean, that's probably not an option for some of you guys. Alternatively is to buy the Raven trigger from Fusion TLC. But first, before that, let's talk about how a flash fires on the camera normally. So for illustration, I'm using my Sony A1 with a V1 on top. So you can say that when you fire a flash, when you press down that trigger here, right, it initiates opening of a shutter. Now, the sync signal doesn't send when you are pressing down the shutter, but it's when the shutter actually opens itself. So step one, shutter starts opening. Then the flash signal fires. Then this signal is received by a flash itself. Now the flash has some lag and latency. So after that lag and latency, it pops its light. Once it pops its light, it will be within the window of the shutter if you are within the camera X sync itself, and then the shutter closes. As such, you get a properly illuminated photo here. Now, why did I use the Sony A1 for this particular video's illustration is because the Sony A1 has one of the fastest flash sync in the market for a focal plane shutter, up to 1/400. But if you notice and ever tried the Sony A1 with any form of flash that is not Sony branded, you'll get a black bar, as you can see in the photo here, a black bar. And this black bar is because the flash lag itself fired a little bit late. And as such, by the time it starts firing, the shutter is already closing, and as such, a portion of the frame is not illuminated. Now, if you were to slow this camera down to 1/320, which means the shutter opens a little bit longer fully, you'll get the whole shot illuminated, as you can see in the photo here. And that's all with the physical flash, which have a very low latency. So the question is, what is this amount of latency here? Personally, I do not know. What I understand is that it's probably in the microseconds, maybe 100 microseconds, 200 microseconds. Very, very small amount. If you consider a flash shutter opening of 1/400, that is 2,500 microseconds. Or if you consider 1/320, that's about 3,000 plus microseconds itself. So that small 100 microsecond normally doesn't affect your shot, except at 1/400, it's a bit tight. And as such, you get a black bar there. Now, if you were to use a wireless Godox trigger on a Sony system, that is not a Sony trigger. I must say, it's not a Sony trigger. Because when you are not using a Sony trigger, you are just firing it like a dumb trigger itself, and that is where you see the lag, the latency. And in addition to that, just now the hardware latency, now you slot in wireless latency itself. And this wireless latency can be seen at 1/320 using the Sony A1. You'll see as this black bar here. Now, is there any way to remove the black bar? Well, you can sync faster by either A, physically connecting like previously, or B, using a faster trigger. So this Raven here from Fusion TLC is a faster trigger, but it is not much faster. According to the guys from Fusion, it is only about 100 plus microsecond faster. But for illustration purpose, you can see it. You notice that the black bar is slightly smaller. And that is the difference. So for most focal plane shutters, because you are talking about thousands of microseconds or a few milliseconds, this difference in latency normally doesn't affect you. And if you are using the Sony trigger, they are using some sort of trickery to fire the flash even faster. So no worries there. Don't worry, you Sony guys. Just to illustrate the point. So for Hasselblad cameras, it's a bit trickier. But before I talk about Hasselblad and how this Godox latency thing affects the camera, let's talk about how a flash graph looks like. So normally when you fire a flash, it looks something like this. There's a peak, followed by a relatively long tail, which means that most of your flash power is in the initial portion of the flash itself. And really, that is what you need to capture, the initial portion, to get the brightness in the photo itself. So what happens for Hasselblad is that if you trigger a bit late, the flash will just be outside the timing where the shutter closes. As such, you get a darker photo itself. The good thing of leaf shutter is that you will never get black banding because there's no such concept of synchronization. What you just get is a darker photo because the flash is outside the opening of the leaf shutter. Now, then 100 microseconds plus difference. Not a huge difference really. If you are shooting at 1/500, it's only 0.1 stop of light difference. But if you were to shoot at 1/1000, for the Hasselblad, it makes a huge difference. And that's because, once again, most of the light is in the early sections of the flash itself. And because of this latency, you are losing some of the early sections of the flash at 1/1000. So with this 100 microseconds improvement, you get a good amount of light more, 0.6 stops of light more. That is a big deal. Now, what happens is that if you go to 1/2000, which is only 500 microseconds of opening, you get even significantly more light. With the Raven TLC, you get 1.1 stop more light compared to 1/500. So that is a big deal, really a huge deal there. As such, if you are using the Godox system with Hasselblad, buy the Raven here. You already spend so much money for your camera, spend a bit more for your flash system to really get the full capabilities of the Hasselblad system itself. The thing is there any better way to do wireless flash for Hasselblad cameras? And that is to use another brand. According to the guys at Fusion TLC, they say that the fastest they could ever fire a Godox flash using their trigger is 630 microseconds. And that's because that is the whole Godox protocol and how they react to the trigger itself. Pretty much that's the fastest they can ever fire the flash. But they claim, and I don't doubt their claim because they were helping me really to do research on this, that if you were using this flash trigger, the Raven from Fusion TLC, with a Profoto or Einstein buff flash, you can go as low as 400 microseconds, which means you will probably capture the whole initial wave of light and therefore get a significantly brighter photo itself. And as such, fully, utilizing the capabilities of a leaf shutter. Because really, you don't need to capture the end of the light. You just need to capture that initial wave. And the only way to capture the initial wave is that you need to sync faster with lower latency. And this trigger with a Paul Einstein buff flash or a Profoto will give you that effect. And that is something that you should consider. But if you're using the Godox system, well, this is your best bet to improve your light output onto the Hasselblad system itself. And that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this short little sharing of me with the Godox wireless system and why I think that this is not the most optimal one. There are ways to improve it, like using this trigger here, but maybe considering another system will fully allow you to maximize the Hasselblad system itself. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.